Esther chapter 3 verses 6 and 13. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So, as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 30th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Anti-Semitism is hostility and prejudice against Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is an age-old problem, dating back to ancient times. The first instance of it in recorded biblical history is found in the book of Exodus. For about 400 years since Jacob brought his family to Egypt, Israel had resided there. Initially, they were treated well on account of Joseph, who saved Egypt from a devastating famine. Subsequently, the Israelites became slaves. Despite their plight, they multiplied quickly in number, which greatly alarmed Pharaoh and his officials. Pharaoh then ordered the massacre of all Jewish baby boys upon birth. Another biblical account of anti-Semitism is recorded in the book of Esther. An extremely powerful man by the name of Haman plotted and secured the king's permission to exterminate the entire Jewish race throughout the vast Persian Empire. God intervened and the impending bloodbath was miraculously averted. The Jews still commemorate and celebrate this divinely orchestrated deliverance today, after some 2,400 years. Here is a brief history of anti-Semitism over the last 2,000 years. It is worthwhile to note that Jews were often vilified and persecuted because they choose to remain separate as a cultural identity and entity rather than to be assimilated into the religions and social customs of their host countries. Christianity is rooted in Judaism. Ironically, after Christianity became the predominant faith in Europe, Christians' attitude towards the Jews turned negative. Hostility arose when repeated attempts to convert the Jews failed. Soon, the Jews were accused of deicide and branded as the killers of Christ. In much of Europe throughout the Middle Ages, the Jews were denied citizenship and civil liberties. They had to put up with anti-Jewish political, social, and economic policies. Often, they were forced to live in special enclaves known as ghettos. In certain cities, they were required to distinguish themselves by wearing a yellow badge. In medieval Europe, some enterprising Jews got involved in the banking and money lending business because Christians were not permitted to lend money with interest. This was a lucrative business, which, unfortunately, resulted in much envy and resentment. Often, this was one of the primary causes for their expulsion en masse from their adopted countries. England expelled all the Jews in 1290, and Spain did the same in 1492. The same thing happened to the Jews in France, Germany, and Portugal during the 14th and 15th centuries. During this period, frequent acts of violence, commonly known as pogroms, were perpetrated against the Jews. Usually, they were carried out with the support of local authorities and national governments. The Jews in Russia also faced many such pogroms throughout the 18th century and the early part of the 19th century. During and in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution from 1917 to 1923, more than 500,000 Jews were left homeless and more than 30,000 were massacred. The worst case of anti-Semitism in modern history happened in Nazi Germany before the Second World War. Adolf Hitler came to power in the early 1930s on the platform of German nationalism, racial purity, and European expansion. He blamed the Jews for Germany's humiliating loss in the First World War and the economic disaster that followed. From 1933, Hitler's push for the Aryanization of Germany resulted in the dismissal of Jews from the civil service, confiscation of Jewish-owned properties, and the forced sale of Jewish businesses. In 1935, Hitler's government enacted the Nuremberg Laws, which contained many anti-Semitic policies. The German Jews were stripped of their citizenship and the right to vote. The systematic stigmatization and persecution of the Jews during these years culminated in a government-sponsored campaign of street violence against the Jews, known as the Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. In these 2 days on November the 9th and 10th in 1938, more than 2,500 synagogues were burned and 7,000 Jewish businesses were looted as police were ordered not to intervene. On the following day, 30,000 Jewish men were rounded up and sent to concentration camps. From then onward, things moved downhill rapidly as Hitler and the Nazis implemented their plan to exterminate the Jews, which is known as the final solution to the Jewish problem. By the end of the Second World War, an estimated 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were systematically killed in the Holocaust. Whereas Haman failed, Hitler succeeded. Anti-Semitism was also rife in the Arab countries in the Middle East and North Africa, especially after the rebirth of Israel in 1948. The Jews living in these countries were forced to leave as hostility against them increased. Today, there are hardly any Jews living in these countries. In the last decade, anti-Semitic sentiments and activities around the world have increased dramatically, most notably in the US and Europe. France fared the worst among the European countries, probably because of its significant Muslim population. Anti-Semitism worsens further following the Hamas attack on Israeli civilians on the 7th of October 2023 and the Israeli military's retaliatory activities in Gaza. Public protests expressing support for the Palestinians and the terrorist organization Hamas sprouted out in many American and European cities. In the United States, students demonstrated often with the support from their college administration. These students, many from the top universities such as Harvard, MIT, Princeton, and Columbia, chanted and taunted the Jews. They intimidated and threatened to harm Jewish students. Many of them don't even know exactly what they are supporting and standing up for. For instance, they carry large placards with words such as "Queers for Palestine" and "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." It is laughable if anti-Semitism is not a serious matter. Queers or homosexuals are not tolerated in the Palestinian territories, just like in most Muslim countries. The phrase, "from the river to the sea," is anti-Semitic to the core. It refers to the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. To chant this slogan simply means to support the eradication of the State of Israel and all the Jews from the God-given Promised Land. What is happening on these US campuses is worrying. Many of these Ivy League college students will go on to become the next generation leaders in American politics and corporations. Their extreme left-wing and progressive mindset is an indication of an anti-Semitic and anti-Israel future in the West. It is a frightening prospect for the Jews living in these places. Anti-Israel sentiments are also rising in the nations, especially after Israel invaded Gaza. If the United Nations resolutions are a measure, then most nations stand squarely opposed to Israel and its actions to defend itself. The United Nations General Assembly has passed more resolutions criticizing Israel more than all the other nations combined. It contributes to what observers call an ongoing lopsided focus on the only Jewish state at the United Nations. Many other countries such as Iran, North Korea, Myanmar, Venezuela, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar with poor human rights record and involved in regional conflicts are not targeted with any resolution at all. Whereas since 2015, the United Nations has adopted more than 140 resolutions condemning Israel. Every country has the right to defend itself against threats from terrorism and hostilities from other countries. But whenever Israel exercises its rights by using its military force, many nations will voice their strong disapproval and rush to condemn it. It reeks of hypocrisy because these nations will undoubtedly do the same thing if they come under attack. From my observation, Israel is not allowed to win a war. The Iranian regime has been breeding threats to wipe out Israel. It has been using its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Islamic Jihad, to launch rockets into Israel almost daily for the past years. But the world remains strangely silent. However, the moment Israel retaliates, it will receive a barrage of criticism and condemnation. Why? The answer is anti-Semitism. The nations of the world have an inherent bias against Israel and the Jews. It is the same for the past and present, and it will be worse in the future. The hatred and persecution of the Jews throughout history is a well-attested and undeniable fact. Without a doubt, the Jews are the most hated race, yet they have survived as a people and fascinatingly thrive despite repeated attempts to annihilate them. It is a testament to God's protection of them. God is not done with them yet. As the Bible reveals, Israel will never be destroyed and the Jewish people will never be annihilated. However, the days ahead will be even rougher for them. Presently, slightly less than 50% of the worldwide Jewish population lives in Israel. About 7 million Jews are living in Israel today. An estimated 7 million Jews living in the US and another million in other countries such as France, Canada, and the United Kingdom, Argentina, Russia, Australia, and Brazil. I believe that anti-Semitism will continue to rise. It will become so bad and so unbearable that many of the Jews living in these countries will be forced to emigrate to Israel, thus fulfilling many Old Testament prophecies of the regathering of the Jews to the Promised Land. Presently, these prophecies are only partially fulfilled. I am confident that they will be fulfilled completely in the near future as we race towards the end of this present age. When all of them are back in Israel, God will deal with the Jews and their sin of unbelief. The Jews will experience their worst nightmare as many nations converge to attack Israel and Jerusalem. According to Zechariah's prophecy, 2/3 of the Jews will be killed. The remaining 1/3 will acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. Thus, all Israel will be saved.